The Detroit Pistons have traded Jaden Ivey to the Chicago Bulls. We are going to be talking about that and much more today here on From Half Court. I am your host, Sean Murphy, and today I have a special guest that we were actually planning on talking well before this happened, but since the big news dropped right before recording, why not go live? I have a first time that I've had someone with this impressive of a resume, so I had to make sure to write it down. She was a representative in the House of Representatives in the state of Michigan for the 40th district, the executive director of the Next 50, identifying the next generation of Democratic candidates, a former figure skater, and a lifelong Detroit Pistons fan, Mari Manoogian. Thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great. I mean, I was doing well, and then all of a sudden, my one meeting for work I had scheduled today, the biggest Pistons news of the year thus far dropped. So
It happened in one of my big work meetings this year as well. So I'm really glad I was able to catch it before I hopped on here with you.
And it was a meeting I had to lead too. So it was like I had to actually like sound coherent. And there was a point where I'd just be like, sorry, really big news just dropped. Just 1 second. I have to tweet something. So felt a little sad that I had to do that. But yeah, obviously for people rolling in, they've seen the news, and I'll pull up the tweet just so we have it here to react to. Like with you being here, I want to talk much more than basketball. I do want to dive deeper into certain things, but also this, how this started was your love of Pistons basketball.
Of course.
And so, with that, I do just want to start with someone who, I do want to get your fan perspective to begin with. What was your initial reaction seeing that Jaden Ivey is no longer a member of the Pistons? And what do you think looking at the return? Per Shams, looks like they got essentially a swap for a first round pick, and then Kevin Huerter and Dario Saric. So some bench help essentially.
Yeah, I think my first reaction was like, obviously Jaden's connection to the city of Detroit with his mother's, playing for the Shock when I was a kid. And his connection to the city is something that I've always thought about as being important to him being part of the team, but and also just sort of recognizing like he played through a lot of like really tough times for the Pistons, and now we're really one of the best teams. I'll say the best team in the NBA. I have no problem saying it, but so I think of course I think about that with this trade, but as someone who's like a Hoops fan first and foremost, I'm just really excited to see what we're able to do in the second half of the season. And really excited to get even deeper as a team. I think, one of the strengths of the Pistons right now is that we've got, frankly, a lineup that we change up from time to time when we need to get our starters some rest. But like every time I've seen the Pistons play in any real combination, whether it's having Danis Jenkins come in off the bench, like we're ready to play with anybody. And so I'm excited to see what these new additions to the team will do for that for us.
Yeah, no question. I think it's pretty clear that Jaden Ivey was struggling, both mentally, but also just on the court as well, ever since coming back from injury. That's a really difficult recovery to make. And, as we've talked before on this podcast, this is a different team that he's coming back to. And this is a different Jaden than before he experienced the injury. And, professional sports it's one of those things where the results tell you almost directly, like what your value is, but also, it almost, it can almost be unfair because it's like, well, you have to consider this. And yeah, Jaden Ivey's probably had as difficult of a road as any lottery pick coming into the league when you talk about the coaching changes and the losing streak and the lack of consistency and how he was handled to now being on a team that has real aspirations to play in June.
That's right.
So when you talk about that radical of a shift, and, I know fans look at this and go, really? We turned a number 5 overall pick into Kevin Huerter and Dario Saric in a pick swap. But it's like, essentially, at this point, you have to take like what you can get to make the team better. And I'm not saying Kevin Huerter's a world beater, but he fills a need. He's historically been a good 3-point shooter. And
that's right.
They also got additional draft capital for, let's say, if they do want to go get that big fish in the summer, they're better equipped to do so.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think, one of the things just I'm not necessarily as big of an NBA stats nerd, though. I guess if I had more time, I probably would dig in the same way I have in previous years. I say that though I am winning one of my fantasy leagues right now, so I guess I'm paying close
Okay,
enough attention. I
okay,
guess
little
I'm
humble
paying close
brag. I
enough
respect
attention
it.
to what's going on. But just from like the eye test, having a little bit more depth from three is going to be huge for the Pistons. We have some really great shooters already. Our defense is incredible. We're getting back to the, old age Pistons. That's sort of what we're known for. But adding a little bit more depth to that 3-point shooting is going to be critical here for us to be successful in the playoffs. So I have to
Yep.
agree with you on that. That's going to be, I think that's probably exactly what they were looking for when making a deal this time around.
Yeah, luckily for you, I am one of those nerds. So the Pistons, according to Basketball Reference, they're 27th in the league in 3-point makes. They're 28th in 3-point attempts, and they're 21st in 3-point percentage. So flat out, they are just not a good 3-point shooting team, which they've been able to overcome because they're so historically dominant in the paint, and they're such a great defensive team. But when you talk about getting to the playoffs, when it becomes more and more of a chess match, when the game does slow down, the teams are going to clog the paint on the Pistons.
That's right.
And when you talk about how do you maximize what you have now while also making sure that you can take, because I think the other element is too, I think this is the best thing for Jaden Ivey, because now going to Chicago, he's in a situation where they're not in the basement of the NBA, but they're certainly not a team that has title aspirations. They want to be competitive every year, but they're also a place where he can make mistakes. And he's now with another really good head coach, and Billy Donovan is with another really good guard in Josh Giddey and some of the other players they have there. There is kind of a log jam, but like, I do think it gives them an opportunity now to kind of reset and no longer have to have the expectations of being a top 5 pick and having to be one of the guys who is supposed to spearhead your offense. That's a lot of pressure to have on someone who's dealing with all those things mentally.
That's right. And I think, as you sort of astutely pointed out previously here, the Pistons are playing a different caliber of basketball than they were previously. It's also you're not just playing a different caliber of basketball, but as someone that's had to lead teams before, when you're going from one level of a team to the next level and you're trying to take this group of individuals to the next level, there are growing pains and challenges that are off court issues that you're not necessarily going to see play out on the basketball court. And that's sort of a learning curve. And some people are able to make that curve and they can get ahead of the curve. And you can see that in the leadership with folks like Cade, obviously, but you're seeing Jalen Duren really step up into a new role of leadership as well on the team. The other person I'd call out as a big team leader is Beef Stew. He's someone who really is a glue guy who understands how to lead a team. And when you're seeing those kinds of folks really come into their own in those roles, it can be hard for other folks on the team. This is basketball and in life to figure out where they fit into the team. And so my hope for Jaden Ivey is that he's able to find that groove for himself on the Bulls, and that he's able to find that spot where he feels like he's contributing in the way that he, can contribute best.
Yeah. Now, Saric, he was throwing in essentially as an extra as a salary, and that's part of why Detroit got the pick. He's not even going to play. I would be shocked if we ever see Dario Saric in a Pistons uniform. But Kevin Huerter, before this year, he's been a really good 3-point shooter. He's only shooting like 31% this year. I think in part he's playing for a Chicago team, that has a lot of identity issues themselves. Now coming to a place where he knows exactly, what's going to be asked of him, and also he's going to now have the luxury of playing opposite of a Duncan Robinson, so that should give him more space. And you have a guy like Cade who's going to be passing you the ball, who, literally other than the guy who's going to be in town tonight, Nikola Jokic, Cade's the best passer in basketball. It's those two guys.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be great. And I think, as you said, I think just adding a little bit more depth to our bench and being able to space the floor here and sort of add just another person who can be an outside shooter to the mix is going to be really interesting to see what we do with our offense.
No question.
Yeah.
Now, Mara, I would be remiss if I didn't ask more about your background in fandom as a Pistons fan. Just like when did that start for you? Like, what was the team that that you resonated with? And just from your perspective of someone who's so intimately familiar with the state of Michigan, but also with the city of Detroit,
Sure.
From your perspective, how much more does it mean that they're having the success in the city itself and not in the suburbs of it?
Yeah, I mean, the first time I became like like the Pistons were relevant to me. This is actually very funny. Is the first Pistons game I ever remember watching from start to finish was the Malice at the Palace game,
Oh, awesome.
which is a ridiculous thing because like that was a such a turning point game for the team and like a really, I mean, it like stands out on the timeline of Pistons events. But at the time, it was like the first game I ever remember watching, and I remember asking my dad. I was pretty little, and I remember asking him like, "Hey, does this happen at all basketball games?" Like we had been watching hockey. As you mentioned, I was a figure skater. And so I was pretty used to seeing fights break out on the ice, but I'd never watched basketball before. And so I
Yep.
asked, like, is this like a normal thing? And he was like, I don't think so. I don't think this is very normal at all. But ever since then, I've been a huge Pistons fan. And Ben Wallace, I have in my place in DC, I have a Ben Wallace autograph lithograph hanging on the wall. I've got a 2004 championship signed ball, and like continue that like the going to work Pistons are still my favorite.
Yep.
In terms of like what it means for the city of Detroit to have a really great basketball team, honestly, what's been really exciting is that all of our sports teams have been really playing excellently in the city of Detroit. And as someone that has, been now involved in politics, but like just, grew up as a Metro Detroiter, and sort of didn't really spend a lot of time downtown as a kid, but have spent a lot of time there. I've lived in the city now, spent a lot of time downtown, and continue to do so, even though I'm back and forth between DC and Detroit now. It's just like so meaningful for the city, and especially because this Pistons team has really taken on the identity of the city. This like gritty, grinded out team playing really tough defense, scrapping for every loose ball. The number of jump balls I've seen this season is really exciting because it means that people are going after it. And so I just think that like especially this Pistons team is like really taken on the identity of the city.
Yep.
And it's exciting to see these young players really embrace the identity of the city as well.
Yeah. And I think teams like the Going to Work Pistons and obviously the Bad Boys, they
Yeah.
embraced the identity of Detroit, and so at that point, it was really easy for them to cling on to the team. But through
Yes.
that stretch when they didn't win playoff games and when the team wasn't looking like the Pistons that we know, like I think the fact that they weren't in the city and the fact that like they that like that disconnect of them being at Auburn Hills was something that was what much more felt, and I think
Yes.
Detroit is intrinsically it's a city that, that feels overlooked, that, it's us against the world. And, I think
Yes.
the fact that Detroit, like one thing that you can't say about Tom Gores is that he hasn't poured into the city and that, he hasn't done, a lot of like, there are a lot of philanthropic things that he's done to, improve the city of Detroit, but actually bringing the team back into the heart of the city and having this, run really, like this first true great run of Pistons basketball in the city itself in like 50 plus years,
Yeah.
I think is something that, when you go to like when I was at the playoff atmosphere last year for like games 3 and 6, I had a headache for days after game 3 because like that
Yeah.
atmosphere was just crazy. But like
Yeah.
it's just I really think you can tell the difference of what it means that this team is in Detroit versus
Yeah.
not.
Absolutely. I took my dad to game 3. It was his first Pistons game since we moved the team from Auburn Hills to Detroit. And he was
Yep.
just like blown away. He thought I mean, obviously the atmosphere was incredible, but just he'd never been to LCA before. And so just to see a brand new NBA arena and like what that felt like, I really think that, overall, this has just like been a really great thing for the city and a great thing for the team. It also gets the players that now they're living in the city. It gets them more connected with their fans. They're more connected to the community, and you can really see that in the way that the fans have embraced this team.
Yeah. And I think if there's anything when you look at, okay, from the personal side, because the NBA is a business, like tying it
Yeah,
back to the Ivy trade for a second, because we do have a lot of people who are
for
coming
sure.
back in. I think one area where you look at why this Ivy trade kind of like hits a little bit different, you brought
Yeah,
up earlier the connection of her mother. And on March 7th, the Pistons are going to be celebrating the 20th anniversary of the '06 Shock Championship. And
that's right.
in 2028 or 2029, I forget which one off the top of my head, but women's basketball will be back in the city of Detroit. And
Yeah,
you talk about Detroit basketball not being whole. I mean, it truly hasn't been whole since Detroit has lost the shock. And
That's
so,
right.
the unfortunate fact that Ivy won't be there, like when that team is back, and the fact that, I hope there's still a good relationship there, but we all know with trades come hard
Yeah.
feelings and come, difficult conversations that are had. So that is something that is unfortunate when you talk about like linking back there. But I mean, it also just kind of speaks again to how rich that history is, that's even a conversation.
That's right, that's right, and I'm incredibly excited for, the new WNBA team to come to the city in 2029. It's gonna be it's one of those things I mentioned right off the top that I was a huge Shock fan growing up, and I remember seeing the '06 championship team,
Yep.
and their connection, of course, to the Pistons with their coach, Bill Laimbeer, was a really important connective tissue between the men's and women's teams, and so I'm just really thrilled for that.
Yeah, me too. I hope to be covering that team full time
Yeah,
whenever it comes back around. Like that's just going to be, just a really special atmosphere when women's basketball is back in the Motor City.
it'll be
Um,
awesome.
Yeah. I think something that strikes me as well about, like this Pistons team and just kind of why they're in the position that they're at, it's, like it's almost similar, like, it's like how the star quarterback is compared to almost being a politician. I think it's
Yeah,
similar when you have your franchise player on a basketball team, right? And it's like
yeah,
Cade is essentially the franchise quarterback, or he is kind of the figurehead of this Pistons movement and what we've seen. And I've said this in a lot of other places, but like Cade's felt like he's been 30 since he was 13. When you talk about his maturity, he
yes,
came into the league with such a great head on his shoulders, and you can just tell that his teammates love playing with him and for him.
yeah,
And it's rare to have players who can not only shine on their own but elevate those around them. And I think when
yes.
you talk about why the Pistons have the chance to be so good for so long, and why, part of why this team is so special, it's you have a guy who not only understands what it takes to win, but he completely gets the city of Detroit. And I don't think you could handpick a superstar in the league right now that is a better fit with the city of Detroit than Cade Cunningham. I literally don't think you could handpick one.
Yes. Well, and I think the other thing about this, really is that, like, um, you know, Kate has really overcome a lot of tough times in the Pistons, right? So, like, he
Yep.
joined the organization, and we had some really tough seasons, and he's, to your point of sort of embodying the city and the spirit of the city, like, Detroiters know how to come back from tough times, and that's Cade. So not only is he like the right fit for the team right now, he has grown and shown that mentality over the course of several seasons. And so I'd argue that, like, being a Piston, he's not only the right fit for the Pistons, but the Pistons are the right fit for Cade. Um,
Absolutely.
so that's sort of how I see it. And he, as you mentioned, he's a young leader. I work with young leaders every single day. And one of the things that I see as a through line, whether you're playing basketball professionally or you're trying to lead a team in a state legislature or running for Congress, is that you're willing to put the work in and do 2 or 3 times as much work as the people around you are doing, and that you set
Yep.
that example as a leader. And Kate, by all estimations, Kate's never had a problem being that guy.
Yeah, not at all. If anything, those who have worked around him, they shine and just brag about the work that he puts in. And like you said, it's like not he doesn't only know what his responsibility is, but he knows what his teammates' responsibilities are. He knows where they're supposed to be at any given time.
Yeah.
And when someone has that high level of a mental acumen for the game at that young of an age, combined with, oh yeah, he's an athletic freak of nature, that was a number one overall pick in the NBA draft.
Yeah.
That's a pretty dang lethal combination to have, and why he could be very, very easily viewed as the best Piston of all time by the time he's retired. Like he's been that level of good thus far to where you can say that and it's not really hyperbole. I mean, there's a
I
high
think
bar. Isaiah won 2 titles, but it's not
right.
impossible.
We got to get him a few ships yet, but I think he's right. He's definitely on his way to being one of the best leaders of a Pistons team for sure.
Yep.
I think that, like, leadership qualities, you can teach a lot of leadership qualities. We try to do that where I work, but a lot of it is like, do you have good bones? Are you coming in with really good instincts? And he seems to be the kind of guy that everyone is really excited to work with. I mean,
Yeah.
the other thing, like, not to bring up something that was sort of like tough to watch, but like he really took a lot of those losses super personally. It was pretty obvious. And I think that was really important for fans to see also, because I think that there are other franchises, whether it's in basketball or otherwise, where people feel like, the players are maybe not playing up to their capabilities, and fans start questioning whether the team is really trying really hard, or that they're trying to get over any of the challenges that they have with winning. And like, it was very clear to us fans that like Cade knew that this was not the best basketball they could be playing, and he not only said it, you could see it on his face.
Yep.
And so I think that was something that a lot of fans really struck a chord with a lot of fans. So they were bought into the concept of like, this is going to take time, that building a good team takes time. And building a good team from a young core takes time. And like, we're starting to see this come to fruition. And I have to say, as someone that knows a lot of New York Knicks fans, I'm pretty thrilled.
Yeah, for sure. And I could say confidently that locker room wants the Knicks.
Oh
They,
yeah.
like they want.
I want the
badly.
Knicks. Like, they've made me want the Knicks.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what else? I mean, for me, like, even just like I try to view things, I try to be like less subjective and try to be less of a fan perspective. But it's like, how do you not have that perspective of,
Yeah.
of like, man, like, bring on the world. Let's go.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes. Well, and I think, like anything in life, whether it's politics or basketball, people love a good storyline. People love
Yeah.
love to follow a story. And I think, we'll play whoever we need to play, and we're going to win whatever series we need to win here. But man, wouldn't it be fun if it was
Yep.
the Knicks?
Yep. Before we get into some more serious conversation, I do have one last basketball question kind of going
Sure.
along those lines. How much more aggressive do you want to see Detroit be before before Thursday's deadline? Because now obviously they went out and made, a decently seismic move today.
Yeah.
But there are other teams, like Jaren Jackson is a Utah Jazz.
Yep.
I'm not sure if you saw that or not.
I sure did. Triple J's on one of my fantasy teams, so I saw that pretty early.
Yep. James Harden might be a Cav come deadline day, which
I was wondering what would happen with the James Harden rumors.
Yeah. The reports keep circulating around a swap of him and Darius Garland, which I mean, I understand it in a vacuum, but boy, is that vacuum flimsy.
Yeah.
So
really, what's going on?
Right. So do you think like there is still a need to go out and make, like a big move, or do you think there's something to be said about seeing what this group is capable of before making any major changes?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to try to like say that I know a whole lot more than folks have been crunching these numbers, admittedly, for probably several weeks. But in my mind, the only thing that I could see adding to this team is adding a veteran. Just one more veteran who's like maybe done something in the playoffs before, that can add a little bit of gravitas to the locker room. Not that it needs a ton more, but that's the sort of piece that I could see where there would be a lot of value add. But man, this team has been impressive up until this point. And I also understand the precarious nature of like adding too many new parts and changing the formula with a team that has worked really hard to get to this point and put this team on the map. And so, rather than sort of messing with this combination of guys that's done really well, I could also see a world in which like we're set, it's over, the deadline comes and this is it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to talk some more serious stuff because,
Sure.
obviously I feel like I couldn't have you on this podcast, and, it would feel like a waste of an opportunity if we spent all of our time talking basketball. As great as it is as enjoyable as it is, but
Sure.
Just would love to, just get your thoughts and, about certain things. Like, for one, like I keep going back to the idea of, I think one of the politics is so divided now. And one of the things that you just keep hearing is keep politics out of sports, keep them separated. And I think the NBA has perhaps been under the crosshairs the most because they've always been the most outspoken. But I think what I would argue, and what I would be curious to hear your thoughts on, is the league is so intrinsically political from day one, and the sport has always been at the forefront of human rights and activization, of activism.
Yeah.
And even as recently, like as the bubble, like I think if there's anything I don't want to see the NBA stray away from, due to the, the constraints of corporate pressure, is the recognition that they can use their platform to better people's lives.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think taking a step back, obviously we're on the eve of a Winter Olympics coming up, and though basketball is not a Winter Olympic sport, it's sort of all of these big national events are sort of cresting right now during this time where there's just frankly a lot of uncertainty and unrest, and frankly the American people are very much on edge. And so I think to your point, like sports have always been political. I don't really understand anybody that says otherwise, from, having to integrate baseball and basketball. And frankly, like the integration of basketball is something that people actually can remember who are alive now can actually talk to you about. It's not something that was a distant memory.
Yep.
The politics of race are always playing out in sports, as well as the politics of the economy and income inequality and what it means to be in a union and what these player unions are doing for players who are maybe not necessarily superstars, but players who are role players. All of that is something that is incredibly relevant. And so, frankly, like, I don't understand how anybody can say that sports is not political. Everything from like going to the city council to see if a city is going to pay for bringing a sports team into a particular area, or whether there's going to be tax breaks for developing a stadium. Like all of this is all it's all relevant and germane to the conversation. And so that's sort of where I come at it from. And I think, I think that we are now living through a time where there is a lot of pressure on people because frankly, because of social media and the interconnected nature of the way that we communicate now. There's a lot of pressure on these young players who probably really, if we're being honest, haven't spent a lot of time thinking about their particular position on any one given issue. There probably is a lot of pressure on them to say something and to get it exactly right. It's something that honestly we see a lot of with our young candidates that I work with who, yes, of course they're running for public office and they do have an understanding and a grasp of the issues at hand, but there's a lot of pressure to get everything right all the time. And I think that's something that's a particular a challenge right now for these young NBA players. But I have to say I was really impressed with the way that Victor Wembanyama handled the situation. I think we're seeing many young players who are stepping up and saying, saying their truth, and they may not get it exactly right or the way that you want to hear it, but they are doing it in a way that is authentic to them. And I think that's really important.
Yeah. I think someone in the sports world that I just really admire, and as someone who is getting in, I don't consider myself the journalist that a lot of other people are, but I do reporting on a day-to-day basis. I see the value of it up close and personal, and someone like Pablo Torre, and Pablo Torre finds out where he's able to to expose and show what a lot of these people are doing, allegedly doing in these in these positions.
Yeah.
The owner of the Grizzlies, I'm not sure if you saw the latest about his company with Ubiquity, and the ways that they're aiding Russia in the war on Ukraine. And I think it's impossible to ignore the fact that, especially as sports only gets bigger and these valuations for franchises get larger, there has to be an increase in scrutiny and questions of, okay, well, where are these powerful people getting these resources to buy these teams? And like what real conversations do we need to have about that? Because even like the Lakers were essentially just purchased with money that was from from a Saudi Arabian fund. It is the way in which like these things are getting funded, and ways that the interests behind the scenes are just radically changing. You might be going, well, who cares? Well, that drastically impacts the NBA's ability to stay at the forefront of the political conversation. And even like you brought up the great things that Wemby said, which were really well said, but I think what was really disturbing at the beginning of what he said was, I'm afraid of they told me to not be to like not speak too strongly on it. Like there's a pressure to like you said, to say the right thing, but not to offend that other side of the aisle.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, just to say the thing, like the Spurs have always been an organization, particularly with Greg Popovich at the helm, that has never shied
My
away
goat.
from saying what needs to be said, and he's never been afraid to say something. And you see that in the coaching tree also, right, where you see Steve Kerr being someone who speaks out pretty frequently as well, and is sort of, I think, I don't know that he necessarily attempts to be this way, but I sort of see him as sort of like, at least in the coaching side, sort of the moral compass of the coaching folks, and speaking out when he feels it's appropriate. And frankly, when you see leadership from a team feeling comfortable speaking out, and that kind of culture within the team itself, so not just within the NBA, but like within a team, that sort of gives a permission structure for someone like Victor Wembanyama to be able to speak out.
Yeah.
And maybe not even, like I said, maybe not necessarily get everything right, but be able to feel like they said what they needed to say. I think, to your point, this is why folks who are running the NBA Players Union, that's why these people exist. And I think the more that you see, corporate power becoming more powerful, and frankly more visible, and the American people asking more questions about it, the more important it is for players' representation, whether it's their agents or whether it's their union, to be able to provide the kind of supports that the players are looking for in these times when there are a lot of cross pressures on them to say something, to not say something. How are they gonna make this connected to the way that they engage their community already? Is what they're saying authentic to them, or does it seem like it's coming out of left field? And honestly, making sure that players feel really comfortable with what they have to say. They may have like an idea. I mean, I come to this all the time with our candidates. A lot of times candidates for office or elected officials have an idea of what they want to say, but they don't exactly know how they want to say it. And so in order to get people to feel really comfortable with it, so, it's authentic to them, it takes a lot of time to make sure that folks are feeling really solid in what they want to say. And so that's where I see sort of the opportunities for the Players Union to really to continue to do the really great work that they're doing.
Yeah.
I want to give a shout out to Erica Swilley. She runs the foundation for the Players Association, and they do incredible work with making sure the players are really connected to their communities. She's formerly part of the Pistons organization, so that's just another connection to how the city and the team really do a lot of great work and develop incredible leaders.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is like a slightly different topic, but not really. Like if I'm not sure if you remember, after the divisional round, there was that reporter from the Jaguars who, kind of gave the words of encouragement to the head coach, actually like a reporter from Detroit. And
I remember this.
It was like a moment that sparked a lot of debate, because I think on one hand, while I think we can recognize and, appreciate the beauty of the humanity of that moment and the empathy behind like what was happening there, I think there are also a lot of people in the sports media world, myself included, that were going, well, but hang on, like that isn't exactly the direction we should be heading. And I think it's like the like, in the sense of, there is still the job, like when you talk about upholding the First Amendment and talking about free speech and the role of the reporter, like one of the jobs of the reporter, whether that's valued or not by the public, which I think one of the biggest problems we're seeing is the lack of value given to good reporting, is you are kind of there to ask the difficult questions. And sometimes questions like, hey, what happened with that interception might seem obvious to you and me, but like you still want to hear the coach have to answer the question.
Yeah.
And so I think, just like tying it back to, just like where we're at as a climate, I think we've, been so, I think, like there should always be a healthy skepticism to everything. But I think like when you talk about giving power back to the people, it's giving power back to the press. And
that's right.
And I think it's just something that, is just something that I am really passionate about. And I think I think that's one of the reasons why we're at where we're at is because there's such a philosophical difference in who's giving the proper information and like what your resource is actually saying about who you are as a person. And it's like there's so many fundamental disconnections that just start from the point of what's actually real and what isn't.
Yeah. I mean, I think part of what you're seeing with this being a challenge is that a lot of local media just like doesn't exist anymore, and the media environment is incredibly fractured and fragmented. I think that there's a wonderful opportunity with a lot of people having like Substacks and new media and ways for folks who are journalists to be entrepreneurial. But on the flip side, I mean, the original traditional media of having, local TV news and local papers. And I'm not just talking about like big city papers like the Detroit News and the Detroit Free Press. I'm talking about, when I was a kid, we had the Birmingham Eccentric in Birmingham, Michigan that
Like Cedar
covered
Springs
local.
Post. Shout out Cedar
Right.
Springs, Michigan. Yep.
That's right, exactly. And so, with the bankruptcy of these smaller news organizations, folks are not used to having relationships with reporters like that. And that's not to say that reporters shouldn't be, asking the right questions and digging in. This is like a slightly funny aside, but like I was a reporter for my high school newspaper, and we uncovered all kinds of things like embezzlement in our high school from our high school football boosters, and like all kinds of stuff as student journalists. And so, like, I respect that is like from an early age, I've really had that curiosity and respect for the First Amendment. But what I would say is that like one of the biggest headwinds for reporters today is that folks are not used to they're not used to seeing their local news anymore. And so with, larger corporations buying up all the local TV stations, you're seeing sort of, I would just say like a similar bent in coverage that is just like not super curious and isn't asking a lot of interesting questions. And so, that's sort of where the backdrop of all of this is coming from. And it's frankly, it's made the American people, I would say, like less literate about what's happening in their communities because of it, and that's a
Yep.
disservice to them. And I have to say, like, it's not entirely the people's fault that this has happened, but it's made our communities, it's made it a challenge for our communities for sure.
And I think when we do talk about the ways that the league can be proactive, and when we do talk about the ways that we can go forward, especially in this climate we live in right now, which we actually, I reached out to you about a month ago before the holidays about coming on, and I actually moved to the Detroit area a couple weeks ago, and so things kind of got delayed, but it almost did serendipitously because there were like some very unfortunate things that came up and happened in the world, the murders, the wrongful killings committed by ICE in Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And it's like those videos are horrifying. They're they're maddening. They strike. If you have an empathetic bone in your body, they break your heart and they hit home in a different way. And
That's right.
I think it's like it's so interesting because it's like on one hand, while we do look at sports, and especially I think a lot of us look at basketball as our primary escape. I think a lot of us would much rather check a Shams notification than check the latest stock investment reports from CNN. But
Yeah,
I
lately,
think,
that's for sure.
right, yeah, 100%. But the reality of it is, I think when you talk about the importance of the league keeping its voice prominent and standing up at certain moments when, because there are moments where this isn't political anymore. This goes beyond. There is politics, and then there is fundamental human rights, which that is under the political umbrella, but it is intrinsically separate. And once we start viewing something like that from from like a political lens, it's like I think that's where we start losing the plot. And so, I'm curious to hear just kind of like what your thoughts are. As more trades keep breaking, the Bulls just traded Nikola Vucevic to the Celtics for Anthony Simons. But anyway,
I mean, I think to your point, I think we've sort of reached a fever pitch in this country. Folks are recognizing that, as you mentioned, the way that ICE has engaged in Minneapolis, particularly with the two murders of Americans there. Lest we forget, also, they took a 5-year-old and held him in a detention center as well, a 5-year-old American citizen. And so, I think that as these stories continue to come out, and also the stories of how the city of Minneapolis really sort of linked arms and said, no, we're not going to tolerate this. Not in our community. This is not how this is not how you're not gonna come into our city and do this to us. As we're seeing more of that, I think we're seeing folks who, as you mentioned earlier, that the country has just become so tribal. But I do really believe that over the past couple of weeks, we've seen a tide turn here, where people are really understanding and grasping like what just simply is, as you pointed out, just not politics anymore, and really is more about who we are as Americans, and that we can recognize that having a secure border and having immigration laws be followed does not mean that we have to be violating the rights of the people in this country. And so I think that that's something that really has broken through.
Yeah, 100%. Before we go, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, just a little bit more about the next 50 and
Sure.
the work that you're doing there. I mean, you are the executive director of that initiative, and just I want to be able to point people to the work that you're doing and where they can go support. So tell us a little bit more about the next 50.
Of course. So the Next 50, we're an organization that supports 50 candidates who are Democrats under the age of 50 every 2 years. I myself was a young state representative. I got elected in my 20s in Michigan, and flipped a battleground district. And so that requires
Flex.
yeah, and it requires having a really good team around you. And so that's what we try to do. We help raise money for our candidates. We help provide political and comms support for them. Help, as I've sort of talked about with you, talk through challenging situations and thinking through how we can best be helpful in sorting through them for our candidates. So that's what we're doing. We know that in this moment, people are looking for new leadership. We have no problem backing folks on our side of the aisle who are willing to call bullshit when they see it. And so that's sort of, we try to take that spirit into the work that we're doing. And that's kind of what we're up to at the Next 50. So I hope folks will follow us.
Yeah, absolutely. Please, definitely, please give that a follow. And if you do want to be more engaged in your community and do want to get more information, that is a great place to check.
It's a great place to start.
But this was seriously a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on. We definitely got to run it back at some point around postseason time. Would love to bring you back, and just again, just appreciate your support over the years. And I thought this was a really fun, cool conversation. So,
of course. Thanks for having me, Sean. Take care, guys.
All right. Thank you guys for joining, and we'll catch you guys next time from Half Court. Be sure you're subscribed.